Good evening. We're going to go ahead and start the evening program. Welcome, welcome. You are the hardy souls to brave the winter, and we'll very much hope that it doesn't start snowing outside in the next hours we're here. I'm Patricia McDonald, Director of the Wichita Art Museum. Glad you're here. We are starting out the year at the Art Museum with ambition and chaos. So thank you for your patience in needing to walk all the way around the building as we've already started our construction for our renovation. We're really wonderfully reimagining a couple of our key public spaces in the building. So of course you'll be back several times between now and the end of April, but it's at the end of April that we're having an extravaganza day on Saturday, April 25th to celebrate the renovations. So our speaker this evening, very fascinating topic, I find at any rate, reflecting on the American West, but taking a whole new frame and thinking much more expansively about what defines the West. We're going to hear about that and some very unconventional, untraditional approach to the subject. Our speaker is JoAnne Northrup, who comes to us from Reno, Nevada. She's the curatorial director and curator of contemporary art from the Nevada Museum of Art. She's been there since 2012. She hails originally from California, so the American West is just a natural part of her DNA since she's been in California and Nevada. She has a bachelor's in art history from UC Santa Barbara and a master's degree from University of Southern California. And she left from Southern California to Northern California and the Bay Area and the San Jose Museum of Art. She was curator there, and then ultimately, by the time she left, she was chief curator, and she was there for a 10-year stretch. So her curatorial experience and practice focused as a contemporary curator on today's scene and what artists make of that. Very varied, lots of different topics, and interesting project. In introducing her and looking at this pretty impressive resume, I decided to focus on just two. In 2010, she curated the mid-career survey for the artist Leo Villareal. And some of us are very jealous of her to get to work with that artist, a light artist. So just to name a couple of works that folks in the room might be familiar with, and therefore it's like, oh yes, Leo Villareal. If you've gone to the Nerman Museum of Art at Johnson County Community College, their new building, he's a light artist, and he did the light piece that is part of the canopy by their entry. And if you've gone to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., you know that there's that interesting connection and really an underground tunnel between the original building and the new wing. That light sculpture that's part of the walkway, that is by Leo Villareal. And if you have not seen the light sculpture that he did on the San Francisco Bay Bridge, you need to go home and Google him and the bridge to see it, because I've not seen it firsthand, but the photographs are just that they make you swoon. Really extraordinary artist, so again, very jealous. In 2017, she organized the exhibition that she called Unsettled, and tonight's talk pulls from that project. 80 artists, 200 works that explored a new concept of the American West, terrain from Alaska to Colombia in South America, and from Australia to Nevada, essentially, with dates, that work dating from a pre-Columbian period to today. And she was able to charm the Los Angeles-based artist Ed Ruscha to be her co-curator on the project. Each of these exhibitions that I just mentioned had a national tour and an accompanying scholarly catalog. Can't wait to hear kind of all the interesting elements about Unsettled in her talk this evening. So JoAnne, welcome to Wichita and welcome to the podium.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I also want to thank Courtney, Tara, and Terry for their support in bringing together this evening's program. Everyone's been so great, and everyone in Wichita has been incredibly nice and welcoming, so thank you for that. The Greater West is what we're exploring tonight. We're exploring the unsettled terrains, shifting frontiers, and limitless horizons of a super region that at least my museum, the Nevada Museum of Art, calls the Greater West. It spans the entire west coast of the Americas, from Alaska to Patagonia, and across the Pacific Basin to Australia and New Zealand. The Greater West was the last part of the planet to be explored and settled by Homo sapiens, the last to be settled by indigenous peoples, the last to be invaded by the colonial powers of Europe. Our history is newer than in other parts of the globe and very much shaped by our geography. It's a geography of frontiers, characterized by vast expanses of open land, rich natural resources, diverse indigenous peoples, colonialism, and the ongoing conflicts that inevitably arise when these factors coexist. We're living in a time when everything around us seems unsettled. Climate and weather patterns, the tectonic plates beneath us, political parties that govern. Every time we turn on the news, we wonder, what next? For many of us, it's time for soul searching, a time to ask ourselves, who are we? What do we represent? Are we defined more by our differences than by our similarities? This is an image of an incredible video project made by South African artist Candice Breitz, which was in the Venice Biennale in 2017, part of the South African Pavilion. The artist interviewed countless refugees to get their stories. In Europe, the refugee crisis is a dominant theme in contemporary art. This is understandable since around the world today there are currently over 70 million people who are displaced, and a portion of these people have sought asylum in Europe. European contemporary artists often focus on the refugee crisis because Europe is ground zero for the crisis. Everyday life is impacted by it. This map portrays the global refugee flow from 2000 to 2015, and it was sourced from the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees. It's admittedly out of date, but it does give you a sense of the massive number of displaced persons in the world in our time. In terms of defining what constitutes a refugee in the 21st century, we still rely on the 1951 Refugee Convention, the Geneva Convention definition. A 1967 protocol expanded this definition, but it still does not take into consideration the reasons for people becoming displaced in our time. Today, people flee their countries because of violence, crushing poverty, and increasingly because of natural disasters due to the climate crisis we're currently experiencing, which has hit the Greater West especially hard. And I decided to put this image of the paradise, the campfire of 2018, because my own sister and niece lost their home in that fire. In the Greater West, the power of nature is strong. We must contend with wildfires. This is a map of the unprecedented Australian bushfires that have been raging since last September. We also deal with recurrent earthquakes. For example, the Central Mexico earthquake, which happened in September 2017, measuring 7.1 on the Richter scale and killing more than 300 people, the largest since the 1985 Mexico City earthquake. Soon after that, Mexico was again struck by a 7.2 earthquake. The 2018 Oaxaca earthquake in southern Mexico. From a geological standpoint, both of these events, the bushfires, the Central Mexico earthquake and the Southern Mexico earthquake occurred in the same general area, a subduction zone where one piece of the Earth's crust, in this case the Cocos Plate, is slowly sliding under another, the North American. Like any other subduction zones around the Pacific and elsewhere, this region is the source of many earthquakes. Some of them are very strong and destructive. Earthquakes are one of the facts of life of the Greater West. Whether you live in Mexico, the Western United States, or Canada, it's all about plate tectonics. The Unsettled exhibition focuses attention on one segment of the Greater West, not the entire super region, because it's just too vast. And as Patricia mentioned, I worked on this exhibition with the artist Ed Ruscha, who is currently 81 years old. And when I talked with him about this exhibition, he said, that's just too big. You can't do that in one show. So that's why I limited myself from Alaska down to basically where Central America ends and South America starts. Unsettled includes artists from the north, in Alaska and Canada, from the western United States, and from Mexico and Central America, stopping at Colombia. Unsettled doesn't include artists from all of South America because I think that's a whole other exhibition. I like to think of Unsettled as one chapter of the story of the Greater West. The exhibition finds its inspiration in the never-ending drama endemic to the superregion, which is rife with upheavals. They are tectonic. The largest earthquake in recorded history was the 1960 Valdivia in Chile. In Alaska in 1964, they experienced a 9.2 earthquake, the Good Friday earthquake, the second largest earthquake in recorded history. So both of them in the Greater West. In fact, the Good Friday earthquake is the topic of this robe made by Alaska Native artist Terry Rothkar. She's Tlingit. And that robe was part of the exhibition, so it really tells a story. So we have also volcanic upheavals. This is a supervolcano beneath Yellowstone National Park, which threatens to have a super eruption. This is in Alaska. Even in Alaska, we have volcanoes. It's crazy. The Bogoslav, which erupted in 2017. And we have, of course, to go with those, cultural collisions. The Indians of all tribes, occupation of Alcatraz, which started in November 1969 and lasted 19 months. The pro-DACA immigration protests. And this is the Women's March in Los Angeles in January 2018. The Greater West is a powerful idea because it was formed not by a government, but rather by geography and by the people who live here. All the geopolitical entities that comprise the superregion are united by the land, the issues that we have in common, and by our perspectives on the world. In organizing the Unsettled exhibition, it was important to go deep not only in space but also in time. I included pre-Hispanic art from Mexico and Central America, as well as prehistoric pottery from the American Southwest. These objects are significant because they represent an ancient form of creative expression and were literally made from the earth. They were balanced out by an assortment of indigenous baskets ranging from purely functional to decorative, providing a touchstone or a grounding for the artworks from the 20th and 21st century. So where does Unsettled come in? Unsettled is an attempt to take the theory of the Greater West and show you what that might look like, seen through the eyes of artists who live and work here. Artists are the people that reinterpret our world and convey it to us. They're the antennae that pick up the incredibly complex things going on in our universe and retransmit them to us in a form that might be disturbing, provocative, or confusing. The artists included in Unsettled use 4 basic strategies to address the common issues and concerns of the Greater West: cultural collision, nuclear anxiety, performing the earth, and mapping the invisible. I'll take some time to break down each category to show you what it looks like. First off, cultural collision, one of the foundational concepts of Unsettled, which is perfectly embodied by Tlingit Unigox artist Nicholas Galanin from Sitka, Alaska, in his photograph titled "Things Are Looking Native, Native is Looking Wider." A black and white image split down the center features Princess Leia from the 1977 film Star Wars in her characteristic white dress and side bun hairdo on the right half, and on the left, an image of Edward Curtis's A Tewa Girl from 1921 from the North American Indian. A Pueblo Indian native of the Rio Grande region of the southwestern United States, the Tewa woman wears her hair in the squash blossom hairstyle. Curtis observed the sitter from a point of view outside her culture, from a perspective that you might consider colonial. The dominant group, in this case, the American film industry, has adopted and absorbed elements of indigenous culture to inject a touch of the exotic, other, into the styling of the character played by the late Carrie Fisher. This is by Dekashin Maynor, and it's titled Reinterpretations. Another example of cultural collision. Maynor is a Tlingit Nishka artist based in Fairbanks, Alaska. Maynor's reinterpretation series bridges past and present. Conducting archival research, he came across a treasure trove of photographs from 1906 by the Juneau-based studio Case and Draper, who focused on Tlingit portraits. Maynor decided to mirror the images, insert his own face, and substitute props drawn from his contemporary practice, such as the camera. Can you tell which one is the artist? I hope so. In doing so, he makes a statement on what Lucy Lepard refers to as image independence and self-representation, inserting his own agency into the mix. Minerva Cuevas, an artist based in Mexico City, created a new commissioned artwork for the Unsettled exhibition. She spent time in Reno, and we made a trip to Lake Tahoe with her. She was fascinated by the history of wildfires in the region and wanted to explore why controlled burning was not part of the Forest Service's regular practice. Cuevas realized that the native people of the Tahoe region ensured that there wouldn't be megafires by controlling brush growth through burning it. She studied the history of Smokey the bear and realized that she might have found her answer. Smokey Bear is an American campaign and advertising icon created by the U.S. Forest Service with artist Albert Stahl, and it's been in use since 1944. Since then, we've ignored the indigenous knowledge of, for example, the Washoe people of the Lake Tahoe area, and instead we follow Smokey's example. This is an installation by the Mexican-born, San Diego-based and artist Power Tools, Ruben Ortiz Torres, and it's titled Power Tools from 1999. There's a great story behind this installation. The first tool on your right is a customized leaf blower machine with 24-karat gold-plated engine, velvet and metal flake, apple candy paint, and the other one is a customized leaf blower machine with electric motor and car battery, and chromed lowrider bicycle club plaque. So there's a story that has to do with Beverly Hills, and everyone in Beverly Hills has an immaculate garden, and the people that do that work are usually gardeners who often are Mexican and Central American, and they rely upon those gas-powered blowers to quickly clean up the yard. So Beverly Hills decided that their peace was being disturbed, and so they outlawed gas-powered leaf blowers. And so here's what the gardeners did. They went on strike. They were independent contractors and they just stopped working. And so during this time, there was one of the gardeners who had a vision, and he created a solar-powered battery for the leaf blower. So the incredible thing is that this installation, so the solar-powered is on the left, and the gasoline-powered is on the right. And one really looks good, but one does good. So both Galanin and Maynor work the theme of cultural collision in their own way while making specific reference to the original inhabitants of the land of the Greater West. Minerva Cuevas and Ruben Ortiz Torres document instances of cultural collision. In the case of Cuevas, her work questions the wisdom of ignoring the precedent of the traditional landowners of the Lake Tahoe region. In the case of Ortiz Torres, he shows how necessity is the mother of invention, and that the green way to do things isn't necessarily the most flashy way. For example, a 15-year-old Prius might not be flashy, but it is green. The through line we see here is the land and the people connected to that land, which forms the identity of the Greater West. As the Unsettled exhibition came together, a recurrent theme kept cropping up, and I'll call it nuclear anxiety. The nuclear legacy of the superregion unites the entire Greater West. On July 24th, 1946, less than a year after America dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Japan surrendered, ending the Second World War, a 24-kiloton atomic bomb was detonated 90 feet beneath the surface in the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean. The area was selected in part because it was sparsely populated or unsettled. The San Francisco artist Bruce Conner's film Crossroads, which was in the exhibition, eloquently documents the events at Bikini Atoll called Operation Crossroads, using footage from the U.S. Department of Defense. The residents of the island were relocated prior to the testing, which involved numerous ships captured from the Japanese and German, in some cases populated by animal test subjects. The sudden, gut-wrenching explosion of the bomb presents a terrible beauty that's difficult to watch without emotion. This is an image from the Nevada Museum of Art's permanent collection created by an artist who is a local. He's Western Shoshone and Washoe, and his name is Jack Malott. His mixed media work, titled The End, envisions a future in which annihilation comes to the land by way of nuclear war. The landscape resembles Western Shoshone land, upon which the Nevada test site was established by the Department of Defense, and hundreds of nuclear bombs were detonated. A large nuclear warhead is aimed for the Earth, while missiles are simultaneously launched from the ground into the air and mushroom clouds arise from the Earth. The beauty of the landscape painted by Malott contrasts with the apocalyptic nature of the theme, perhaps suggesting that after civilization is razed by nuclear war, the land will eventually recover and endure. When Inupiaq, Alaska native artist Ken Lisburn, who died in 2017, was a young boy, the United States Atomic Energy Commission proposed to create a major harbor near Cape Thompson on the Arctic coast of Alaska, his homeland. The artificial harbor would be created by burying and detonating a string of nuclear devices in a proposal dubbed Project Chariot. The local Inupiat resisted the proposal, which they felt threatened their lives and the lives of the animals on which they depended. Nuclear experiments did happen in the area, contaminating the land, but the planned detonation never happened. Lisburn's nightmares about the nuclear explosions and the aftermath are the subject of his watercolors. While the California artist and restorer Al Farrow was on a trek in northern New Mexico. He allegedly discovered examples of Membra's pottery. His bowls, which he created, resemble meticulously restored artifacts, yet bear Cold War era symbolism, a radiation hazard symbol, or a mushroom cloud over the pueblos. Pharaoh once reflected, where do we test? Where there's empty land. Where is that empty land? Always the last place the white man would think of living. This idea could be applied to Bikini Island, where we kicked all the people off their island so we could test our bombs. Non-native artists Bruce Conner and Al Farrow, and native artists Jack Malott and Ken Lisburn share common concerns about the terrifying power of nuclear weapons expressed through a wide range of artworks, each one of their statements grounded in a subregion of the Greater West. Many of the artists in Unsettled feel an intense physical connection to the earth. This stems from both a sense of indebtedness to nature for all her gifts and a keen understanding that during the Anthropocene, things have gotten out of balance, not only our relationship with the earth, but with all of Earth's inhabitants. This strategy is performing the earth, and the artists include Teresa Fernandez, Francis Elise, Regina Jose Galindo, Paul Cos, and Annamund Etta. This is a video by Teresa Fernandez, who was born in Tampico, Mexico, and lives in San Francisco. She staged a performance on the border wall between Mexico and the United States, and she's on the Tijuana side of that. And she staged this entire performance. She bought a blue that she thought would make the fence fade into the sky. And she dressed up in her best dress and high heels because she studies also tango dancing. And she painted this border wall until it almost seemed to disappear. And this video documents that performance. She also makes a point of saying that she likes to wear the high heels because she said that, in dancing tango, you have to dance backwards. And so she feels like that's very empowering for her as a woman. So Francis Elise is a Belgian-born artist who lives in Mexico City, and he had a very strange project that he started in 2000. He would go to the Mexican countryside in search of tornadoes or dust devils in order to film them. And what he did is he would take his camera and run after the dust devils and then plunge into the center with his camera in an attempt to sort of capture that experience of being in the center of it. So he fails again and again and again, and that's sort of the topic of the video. He documents this, fruitless action of flinging himself into the tornadoes like a modern-day Don Quixote. Regina Jose Galindo is an artist based in Guatemala City. She is known for taking risks, for testing the limits of her body and its capacity to speak. In one of her performances, for example, she had herself waterboarded. She's also created ephemeral performances that exist afterwards as a trail of her own bloody footprints, marking a path between the Constitutional Court and the National Palace in Guatemala's national capital. For her 2015 performance in Santiago de Chile entitled Desierto, which is portrayed here, Galindo immersed her body under a simulated desert made of sawdust inside an art gallery. She mounted this action in protest of desertification that's been allowed to happen in places where the land has been abused as a result of monoculture, where a single type of tree is planted as a cash crop. She selected pine sawdust to target the forms of oppression, abuse, racism, and colonialism that are hidden behind the pine timber industry, a cause of serious damage to Chile's ecosystem. In doing so, she addressed the violence suffered by the indigenous Chilean Mapuche community, a reality that's easily extrapolated to other indigenous cultures. Whether in the Australian outback, the Arctic Circle, or the vast expanses of desert in North America, in wide open landscapes, distances are difficult to measure based on the massive scale of the land and its features. Artist Paul Koss was born in Wyoming but made his career in San Francisco. He spent a lot of time driving between California's West Coast and his family home in Wyoming. That's a distance of over 1,000 miles. As a conceptual artist, he knew that the time he was spending in his driving could be functional, and he decided to turn his car into a studio. His 1971 video titled Roping Boars Tusk is one of the results of that undertaking. It shows the artist in Wyoming's vast red desert attempting to lasso an isolated landform called Boar's Tusk. The video speaks to the vastness of the West, in which it's difficult to determine distance or scale. Formations that appear to be nearby are in fact miles away. The artist's repeated attempt to accomplish an absurd task presents a useful metaphor for human progress. Why do we keep trying to do the impossible, to rein in nature? Next, the artist Annamund Etta created performances in which she interacted with the land, including the Silhouette series in Mexico, which was included in the Unsettled exhibition. The artist cast herself as an element of the natural world and therefore temporary, rather than godlike and permanent. Her non-invasive actions were respectful of the earth and profoundly ephemeral. Some of her performances are recorded on film, some in still photographs, and some not at all. If the Greater West was formed by geography and the people that inhabit the superregion, then performing the earth is one of the purest forms of art that can take place there, whether that art takes a form that's conceptual, ontological, or political. The land that sustains the artists who perform the earth is also their chief source of inspiration. The final strategy among the artists included in Unsettled is mapping the invisible. These artists create works that draw our attention to things, often very important things that are not evident to the naked eye. In a recent article in the online publication Medium, artist Trevor Paglin wrote, "In my work as an artist, I'm always trying to find ways that allow us to see forms of power and infrastructure that we otherwise blindly accept as given fact." In this diptych titled NSA Tapped Fiber Optic Cable Landing Site, Morro Bay, California, United States, which was lent by the Lannan Foundation, Paglin maps and photographs the site off California's Morro Bay, where the National Security Agency taps underwater fiber optic telecommunication cables, effectively spying on the populace. Paglin's work highlights how unaware we are of our government's actions. Chris Burden's installation, All the Submarines of the United States of America, 1987, consists of 625 cardboard models suspended from the ceiling. Burden's goal was not to condemn, but to document the arsenal of the United States from the 1890s to the 1980s. His intention was to make a visible record and give viewers a sense of the enormous power that the United States exerts. Submarines, like most sea life, exist underneath the surface of the oceans, a vast resource that passes largely unseen. And finally, Frohawk Two Feathers, the artistic alter ego of Umar Rashid, a Los Angeles-based performer, writer, and artist, whose work is embedded with semi-real and imaginary colonial histories. Two Feathers created a magnificent new map for the Unsettled exhibition, focused on the Greater West's most prominent feature, the vast Pacific Ocean. He depicted the ocean dotted with islands and inhabited by indigenous populations whose lives and fates would be dramatically impacted by the influx of European visitors. And now to show you just a few installation images of the exhibition as it appeared at the Nevada Museum of Art in 2017 into 2018. And then the exhibition traveled to the Anchorage Museum in Alaska. And then it finally ended up at the Palm Springs Art Museum in Palm Springs, California, where it closed last spring. And that's Dekashin Mainer's installation. He's the artist from Fairbanks, Alaska. Some of the Pre-Columbian art. And this is a mega installation by the Bolivian artist who's based in Mexico and London, named Sonia Falcone. It's called Campo de Color, and it was a huge installation of spices and pigments that scented the entire museum, much to the delight of some people and annoyance of others. And we actually purchased that installation, but you have to throw away the spices at the end of the show, and then you buy new ones, new spices and pigments. And there's another view. You can see on the wall of the Burden installation, he lists all the submarines of the United States from 1890 to 1987. And we had so many Navy visitors come in and go like, there it is, that's my ship right there. So that was really neat. And then I just decided to comb through the Wichita Art Museum's collection and decide what I would have included in the Unsettled exhibitions if only we had been friends back in 2016. But we only met last year, so that's too bad. I hope that today in my talk I've shown you that the Greater West is defined by geography and human evolution rather than by geopolitical boundaries. How the artists in Unsettled use 4 basic strategies to address the common issues and concerns of the Greater West: cultural collision, nuclear anxiety, performing the earth, and mapping the invisible. "300 million years ago, we weren't separate, we're rather all part of one supercontinent called Pangaea. Even then, the geopolitical entities that would become the Greater West were situated on the edge. The edge is not a safe place to be, but it's incredibly dynamic. It's a place where we look out at the expanse of the Pacific Ocean and dream about where we're going next, rather than looking back to where we've come from." Thank you.